The first mistake most people make is believing that disrespect begins with someone else's attitude. It doesn't. Disrespect begins the moment people discover that your standards can be negotiated. Long before anyone interrupts you, ignores your opinion, or treats you as insignificant, they have already been studying you. Human beings are constantly reading silent signals. They notice what you tolerate, what you forgive, what you excuse, and how desperately you seek acceptance. The frightening truth is this: people rarely disrespect confidence first. They disrespect permission. And permission is often given without a single word being spoken. Robert Greene repeatedly reveals one principle throughout his work. Power is rooted in perception. Before people challenge your authority, they measure your self-worth. If they sense that your confidence depends on their approval, they know they possess leverage over you. But when they encounter someone who values themselves, regardless of outside validation, the psychological game changes. Suddenly, disrespect becomes risky because they no longer control the outcome. This is why self-respect is not simply a personal virtue. It is a strategic weapon. It silently communicates that there are consequences for crossing your boundaries. Not consequences born from anger or revenge, but consequences born from your willingness to walk away, withdraw your attention, or remove your presence completely. People fear losing access to those who refuse to tolerate disrespect far more than they fear loud displays of aggression. Look carefully at the people who naturally command respect wherever they go. They are not constantly proving themselves. They are not chasing recognition. They don't interrupt conversations just to be noticed. In fact, they often speak less than everyone else. Yet when they do speak, people listen. Why? Because their behavior the room one undeniable truth. My value does not depend on your opinion. That quiet certainty creates psychological pressure. Others become careful because they realize this person cannot be manipulated through approval, guilt, or intimidation. Now, compare that to someone who constantly seeks acceptance. They laugh at jokes made at their expense. They apologize for things that require no apology. They change their opinions to avoid disagreement. They ignore repeated disrespect because they fear losing relationships. At first, people may appreciate their kindness, but over time, appreciation turns into familiarity. Familiarity turns into entitlement, and entitlement eventually becomes disrespect. Human nature rarely protects what comes without conditions. The uncomfortable reality is that every time you allow someone to cross a line without responding, you redraw that line farther away. People learn through patterns, not promises. If your actions repeatedly tell them that your boundaries are flexible, they stop treating those boundaries as real. Soon, they begin testing you in bigger ways, not necessarily because they hate you, but because they have learned there is no meaningful cost for doing so. This is where most people make another mistake. They believe respect is earned by being agreeable, but history, leadership, and psychology all reveal something different. People admire kindness, but they respect standards. A person without standards may be liked for a moment, yet they are rarely taken seriously. The individual who calmly protects their dignity, even when it creates discomfort, becomes unforgettable. They establish a reputation that travels ahead of them. Others begin thinking twice before crossing someone who has already shown they will never compromise their self-respect for temporary approval. Notice that true self-respect never needs to announce itself. It doesn't rely on threats, emotional outbursts, or constant reminders of status. Those behaviors usually expose insecurity. Genuine confidence is quiet because it has nothing to prove. It understands that walking away from disrespect is often more powerful than winning an argument. Silence, distance, and consistency become forms of strength that people cannot easily challenge. The paradox is simple. The less desperately you seek respect, the more naturally you receive it. The moment people realize your identity is not for sale, your principles are not negotiable, and your dignity cannot be purchased with attention or approval, they begin treating you differently. Not because you demanded respect, but because they understand that disrespect will cost them access to someone who knows their own worth. And once you've established that unshakable foundation, the next step is learning to make every word carry enough weight that people think twice before ever crossing you again. Once you've built unshakable self-respect, the next challenge is making sure people recognize it without you ever having to announce it. This is where most people fail. They believe authority comes from speaking more, explaining every decision, or winning every argument. But in reality, the more desperate you are to be understood, the less powerful you appear. Every unnecessary explanation reveals something deeper. It suggests that you need other people's permission to feel justified. And the moment people sense that need, they realize they have influence over you. Powerful individuals understand a principle that most people overlook. Words are valuable only when they are scarce. The person who speaks endlessly gives everyone access to their thoughts, emotions, and intentions. There is no mystery left, no uncertainty. And when people completely understand you, they also learn how to predict you. Predictable people are easy to manipulate. They know exactly which buttons to press, which criticisms will provoke you, and which compliments will win your approval. Robert Greene often emphasizes that mystery creates power. The less people know about your inner world, the more carefully they must approach you. Human beings naturally fear what they cannot fully predict. This is why the quiet person in a room often attracts more attention than the loudest one. While everyone else is competing to be heard, the silent observer is gathering information. They are watching personalities, weaknesses, ambitions, and emotions unfold without revealing their own hand. In every social interaction, information is power. The one who reveals less usually possesses more. Think about someone who feels the need to defend themselves every time they're criticized. Before anyone finishes speaking, they begin explaining their intentions. listing excuses, and trying to prove they were misunderstood. Their words may be logical, but psychologically, they communicate insecurity. They tell others, "Your opinion affects me enough that I must convince you." Now, compare that with someone who listens calmly, responds only if necessary, and refuses to justify every decision. Their silence creates uncertainty. People begin questioning themselves instead. They wonder whether their criticism had any effect at all. That uncertainty quietly shifts the balance of power. This doesn't mean becoming cold or refusing to communicate. It means becoming intentional. Every sentence should have a purpose. Every opinion should add value. People naturally respect those whose words carry weight because they know those words are never wasted. Imagine two leaders entering a meeting. One dominates every conversation, interrupts constantly, and speaks simply to fill the silence. The other listens carefully, allows everyone else to reveal their thoughts, and then offers only a few precise observations. Which one do you think leaves the stronger impression? More often than not, it is the second. Their restraint creates authority because people instinctively associate control over speech with control over emotion. Silence also protects you from one of the greatest dangers in human interaction, revealing your weaknesses too early. Every unnecessary complaint, emotional reaction, or impulsive confession provides others with information they may eventually use against you. Not everyone has bad intentions, but human nature remembers vulnerability. In moments of competition, conflict, or disagreement, people often reach for whatever knowledge gives them an advantage. The less ammunition you provide, the harder you become to challenge. There is another psychological effect that silence creates. It forces others to fill the empty space. Most people are uncomfortable with silence, so they begin talking. They reveal secrets, opinions, fears, and motivations without realizing it. While they expose themselves, you remain composed, collecting valuable insight. Over time, this habit allows you to understand people far better than they understand you. That imbalance of knowledge naturally commands respect. Remember, speaking less does not mean thinking less. It means replacing impulsive reactions with deliberate responses. It means choosing influence over attention, strategy over emotion, and presence over noise. When every word you speak is measured, people stop listening for quantity and start listening for significance. Eventually, they realize that if you have decided to say something, it is probably worth hearing. And once your words begin carrying that kind of weight, the next step is making your boundaries impossible for anyone to ignore. Speaking less gives your words value, but words alone are never enough. If people discover that your limits exist only in conversation and not in action, they will eventually stop taking both your words and your silence seriously. This is why boundaries are the true test of authority. They separate people who merely ask for respect from those who naturally command it. Every boundary you set sends a message, but every boundary you fail to enforce sends an even louder one. Human nature pays attention to actions, not declarations. If your behavior contradicts your standards, people will always believe your behavior. One of the greatest illusions is believing that disrespect happens all at once. It rarely does. It usually begins with something small. A sarcastic remark that goes unanswered, a promise that is repeatedly broken, someone constantly interrupting you, a friend who only contacts you when they need something, a colleague who takes credit for your work. These moments may seem insignificant, but psychology works through patterns. When people cross a small line without consequence, they become curious about where the next line is. Every successful test encourages another one. Over time, what began as a minor act of disrespect becomes a habit because you unknowingly taught them that your boundaries were optional. Robert Greene often explores how power is established through consistency. People quickly learn who can be pressured and who cannot. They observe whether your principles change depending on who is standing in front of you. If you remain firm only when it is convenient, your boundaries lose credibility. But when your standards remain the same, regardless of status, popularity, or circumstance, people begin adjusting their behavior before they even interact with you. Your reputation starts doing the work that your words no longer need to do. Many people fear setting boundaries because they worry others will dislike them. But this fear creates an even greater problem. The desire to be liked often becomes an invitation to be used. The more you prioritize keeping everyone comfortable, the more uncomfortable your own life becomes. Eventually, you find yourself surrounded by people who respect your usefulness, but not your value. They appreciate what you do for them, yet they never hesitate to cross your limits because they have learned that your need for approval is stronger than your commitment to yourself. The strongest boundaries are not emotional. They are calm, predictable, and consistent. Imagine someone repeatedly speaks to you with disrespect. The average person reacts with anger, argues, and threatens consequences they never enforce. The powerful person does something different. They remain composed. They do not raise their voice or seek revenge. Instead, they quietly change their behavior. They reduce access. They stop giving unnecessary attention. If the disrespect continues, they remove themselves entirely. This response creates far greater psychological impact because it demonstrates that your standards are real. There is no drama, only consequences. People often mistake this for being cold, but it is actually a form of self-respect. You are not punishing others. You are protecting your own dignity. There is an important difference. Punishment is driven by emotion. Boundaries are driven by principle. The moment people realize that your decisions are guided by principles instead of temporary feelings, they begin taking every interaction with you more seriously. Another reason boundaries command respect is because they eliminate uncertainty. People know exactly where they stand with you. They understand that honesty is rewarded, manipulation is ignored, and repeated disrespect leads to distance. This consistency creates trust even among those who disagree with you. Ironically, People often respect someone with firm boundaries more than someone who tries to please everyone. Why? Because predictable strength feels safer than unpredictable weakness. There is also a hidden psychological effect at work. When someone loses access to your time, your attention, or your presence because they crossed a line, they begin to associate disrespect with loss. That lesson is far more powerful than any lecture or argument. Human beings remember consequences far longer than they remember conversations. Once that association is formed, they naturally become more careful in future interactions. Never forget that every relationship teaches people how to treat you. Every compromise, every reaction, and every decision becomes part of that lesson. If your boundaries disappear under pressure, your authority disappears with them. But if your standards remain firm even when they are tested, people soon realize that disrespect is simply not worth the cost. And once your boundaries become impossible to ignore, the next level of power comes from mastering your emotions when others try to provoke you. By now, you've built self-respect, learned to speak with intention, and established boundaries that people can no longer ignore. But there is one final test that determines whether all of that power is real or merely an illusion. It happens in the moments when someone deliberately tries to provoke you. They criticize you in public, they question your authority, they insult you, hoping to pull you into an emotional reaction. At that moment, your greatest enemy is not the person standing in front of you. It is your own emotions. The person who controls your emotions controls you. And the moment someone can predict your reactions, they begin to manipulate your behavior. This is one of the oldest principles of power. People often believe strength is the ability to dominate others, but real strength is the ability to dominate yourself. Robert Greene repeatedly points out that emotional reactions cloud judgment. Anger, frustration, and wounded pride create blind spots that intelligent opponents can easily exploit. The person who remains calm while everyone else loses control quietly gains the advantage because they continue thinking while everyone else is reacting. Think about how easily people can expose your weaknesses if they know exactly what triggers you. If a single insult is enough to make you lose your composure, they have discovered your weakness. They no longer need intelligence or strategy. They simply need to repeat the same trigger whenever they want to distract you. Every emotional outburst becomes evidence that your behavior can be controlled from the outside rather than directed from within. This is why truly powerful people rarely react immediately. They understand that every emotional response reveals valuable information. Anger exposes your insecurities. Defensiveness exposes your fears. Desperation exposes your dependence on approval. Even excessive excitement can reveal your intentions before the right moment. The calmer you remain, the less information you give away. Silence protects your strategy while emotional reactions expose it. Imagine two people facing the exact same insult. The first instantly argues, raises their voice, and spends the next several minutes trying to prove the other person wrong. Everyone watching may remember the argument, but they also remember who lost control. The second person listens without interruption, pauses, and either responds with a few calm words or chooses not to respond at all. That silence creates discomfort. Suddenly, the attention shifts away from the insult and toward the person who refused to be emotionally shaken. Instead of looking weak, they appear impossible to manipulate. This doesn't mean suppressing emotions or pretending they don't exist. Every human being experiences anger, disappointment, and frustration. The difference is what happens between feeling and acting. Powerful people create space between the two. They allow emotions to settle before making decisions. That short pause often prevents mistakes that emotional people spend years trying to repair. There is another psychological reason emotional control commands respect. Most people expect predictable reactions. They expect anger after an insult, panic during pressure, or fear when challenged. When you refuse to react in the expected way, you introduce uncertainty. Uncertainty makes people cautious. They begin wondering what you are thinking, what your next move will be, and whether provoking you was actually a mistake. That uncertainty alone can discourage future disrespect because people hesitate to challenge someone they cannot emotionally read. History repeatedly shows that great leaders, skilled negotiators, and influential individuals share this quality. They do not allow temporary emotions to dictate permanent decisions. They understand that every emotional explosion gives away power that may never be recovered. Remaining composed is not passive, it is strategic. It allows you to choose your response instead of letting someone else choose it for you. Perhaps the greatest advantage of emotional discipline is that it protects your reputation. People eventually forget arguments, but they rarely forget composure. Over time, they begin associating you with stability, confidence, and self-control. They realize that intimidation, insults, and manipulation simply do not work on you. Once that reputation is established, many conflicts end before they even begin because people instinctively look for easier targets. In the end, people don't fear the loudest person in the room. They fear the one who cannot be emotionally controlled. When others realize they cannot provoke you into making mistakes, they lose one of their most powerful weapons. And once your emotions are completely under your control, the next step is becoming so valuable that people fear losing your presence more than they value disrespecting you. Once you become emotionally unshakable, you reach a point where arguments no longer define your power. But there is another level that makes people think twice before ever disrespecting you. It is not your words. It is not your temper. It is your value. Human nature operates on a simple principle. People protect what they fear losing. If your presence is common, your attention is unlimited, and your time is available to anyone at any moment, people slowly begin to take you for granted. Familiarity without value breeds indifference, and indifference is often the beginning of disrespect. This is why powerful people never make themselves endlessly available. They understand that attention is one of the most valuable resources they possess. Every minute you give away carelessly tells people that your time has little worth. Robert Greene often illustrates that scarcity increases perceived value. Throughout history, the rare has always been considered more precious than the ordinary. The same principle applies to human behavior. The person who is always present is often overlooked, while the person whose presence must be earned naturally commands greater respect. Many people make the mistake of believing that being constantly available makes them more important. They answer every message immediately, cancel their own priorities for others, and remain accessible no matter how they are treated. At first, this may appear generous, but over time, people begin expecting it instead of appreciating. What was once viewed as kindness becomes obligation. The moment you fail to meet that expectation, the same people who benefited from your availability may become frustrated, not because you did something wrong, but because they had grown accustomed to unlimited access. Look at the people who hold real influence in any environment. They are not impossible to reach because they are arrogant. They are selective because they understand the value of focus. Their attention is invested where it matters most. They protect their energy from unnecessary distractions. This selectiveness creates an invisible psychological effect. Others begin valuing every interaction because they know it is not freely given. Respect grows when access must be earned rather than assumed. However, becoming valuable is about much more than limiting your availability. The greatest source of value is continuous personal growth. Skills, knowledge, discipline, confidence, and reliability are assets that cannot be easily replaced. When you constantly improve yourself, you become increasingly difficult to ignore. People may disrespect empty titles or temporary success, but they hesitate to disrespect genuine competence. Deep down, they understand that someone who consistently creates value possesses options, and people with options are never easily controlled. This is why chasing attention is such a dangerous habit. Attention can be given today and taken away tomorrow. Real value is different. It exists whether people recognize it or not. If your confidence depends on applause, compliments, or social approval, your power disappears the moment those things vanish. But when your confidence comes from your abilities and your character, outside opinions lose their ability to define you. Others sense that independence, and it immediately changes the way they interact with you. Another powerful lesson is learning to walk away from situations that no longer respect your value. Many people stay in unhealthy friendships, workplaces, or relationships simply because they fear being alone. That fear weakens their position. When others realize you believe you have nowhere else to go, they know you are unlikely to leave, regardless of how you are treated. But the moment they understand that you are fully prepared to walk away rather than accept disrespect, the balance of power shifts dramatically. Suddenly, they become the ones worrying about losing something valuable. Notice that none of this requires manipulation or arrogance. It is not about pretending to be unavailable or acting superior. It is about building a life so meaningful that you are no longer desperate for anyone's validation. Your purpose, your discipline, and your standards become more important than temporary approval. Ironically, the less desperately you seek people's attention, the more attention they willingly give you. The people who are most respected are rarely those who demand importance. They are the ones whose absence is felt the moment they leave. Their value speaks long before they do, and their presence is appreciated because it is never wasted. When people realize they can lose access to someone who genuinely enriches their lives, disrespect becomes a risk they are no longer willing to take, and after building that kind of value, the final step is ensuring that your actions create a reputation so strong that people think twice before ever testing your character. By this point, you've learned that respect begins with yourself, grows through disciplined speech, is protected by firm boundaries, strengthened by emotional control, and reinforced by becoming genuinely valuable. But none of these principles will matter if they remain ideas instead of habits. In the end, people don't judge you by what you claim to believe. They judge you by what you repeatedly do. Your reputation is not created by your intentions. It is created by your actions. And once a reputation is established, it begins speaking before you ever enter the room. Robert Greene often explores one timeless reality of power. People trust patterns more than promises. Anyone can claim to be confident. Anyone can say they deserve respect. Anyone can talk about loyalty, discipline, or strength. But words disappear the moment reality contradicts them. If someone repeatedly watches you compromise your standards under pressure, your reputation changes. If they consistently see you standing by your principles, even when it costs you something, your reputation changes in a completely different direction. Over time, people stop questioning who you are because your actions have already answered the question. This is why consistency is one of the most underestimated forms of power. Most people are predictable only in their inconsistency. They are confident when everything is going well, but insecure when challenged. They enforce boundaries with some people, but ignore disrespect from others. They speak about discipline while repeatedly breaking promises to themselves. This inconsistency creates doubt, and where doubt exists, respect begins to fade. People naturally test individuals whose behavior changes according to convenience because they sense uncertainty beneath the surface. Now, imagine someone who behaves differently. Their standards remain the same regardless of who they are speaking to. They are respectful without becoming submissive. They are calm without becoming passive. They are confident without seeking attention. They keep their word even when no one is watching. Day after day, their actions reinforce the same message. Eventually, something remarkable happens. People stop testing them because experience has already taught them what the outcome will be. their reputation becomes a silent warning that disrespect will never be rewarded. One of the greatest mistakes people make is trying to protect their image instead of building their character. An image depends on what people think today. Character determines what they will think tomorrow. You can spend years carefully managing appearances, but a single moment of weak character can destroy that illusion. Real influence is built differently. It comes from making hundreds of small decisions that align with your values until those decisions become your identity. At that point, respect is no longer something you ask for. It becomes something people naturally associate with your name. There is also a powerful psychological principle behind reputation. Human beings rely on past experience to predict future behavior. If someone has consistently shown confidence, discipline, and integrity, people expect those qualities to continue. They hesitate before acting disrespectfully because previous interactions have already taught them there will be consequences. Not dramatic consequences driven by anger, but calm, predictable consequences driven by principle. That expectation changes behavior before conflict even begins. This is why the strongest people rarely need to defend themselves. Their reputation does it for them. Others have already seen how they respond under pressure. They have watched them walk away from manipulation, refuse to tolerate disrespect, and remain composed in difficult situations. Those memories become part of their identity in the minds of others. Over time, people begin treating them with greater care, not because they are feared in the traditional sense, but because their character has proven that crossing them is simply not worth it. Remember, every conversation, every decision, and every challenge contributes to the story people tell about you when you are not present. You may never hear those conversations, but they shape opportunities, relationships, and the level of respect you receive. That is why every action matters. Every promise you keep strengthens your reputation. Every standard you protect reinforces your authority. Every moment of discipline adds another layer to the image that others carry in their minds. In the end, making people fear disrespecting you is never about intimidation, aggression, or forcing others into submission. It is about becoming the kind of person whose self-respect is unwavering, whose words carry weight, whose boundaries are consistent, whose emotions remain under control, whose value is undeniable, and whose actions build a reputation that speaks louder than any argument ever could. Once you reach that point, respect is no longer something you chase. It becomes something people choose to give because they understand that your character leaves them no other reason to do otherwise.